Hi, good morning. This is Bob Hatton. This is The Encourager. Luke starts his gospel by telling us about John the Baptist. Actually, the other evangelists, they also start the gospel in this sense. I mean the story of Jesus' life on earth. They start it with John the Baptist, and John the Baptist is more than just a figure on the periphery of the story that we're going through. He is one of the main people, and Jesus and John, they were born within 6 months of each other. They had both had really miraculous births, miraculous conception. John's mother Elizabeth, she was really too old to have a child, and Jesus' mother Mary, she was much too young to have a child. But this was in God's plan. Now, the last book in the Old Testament is the book of Malachi, a prophetic book, and in the last few sentences of that book, God says that one will come and a second person will come, and the second person will be the forerunner of the first. He will make preparation for the first, and he will come in the spirit and in the power of Elijah. And John the Baptist, he got the name Baptist afterwards because he was baptizing so many people. John the Baptist did come in the spirit and in the power of the prophet Elijah. God had started something. Now, after Malachi had prophesied that these things would happen, there was silence for 400 years. God didn't speak to his people again for the next 400 years. And at the beginning of the Gospels, this is when God has broken his silence and is now starting to speak to his people. Despite that, there was a kind of atmosphere, there was an ethos, there was some kind of a feeling, an expectation amongst the people that God was going to do something. And we see this mentioned in the Gospels in a number of places, that certain people were waiting for the comfort of Israel. The comfort of Israel, and the comfort of Israel was, of course, the coming of the Messiah. Now, during these 400 silent years, a lot of things were happening. A lot of historical things were happening. When Malachi was ministering, the Persians were the dominant power in the Middle East. But they were relieved by the world empire of the Greeks, Alexander the Great. But their empire didn't last very long, and of course Alexander died as a relatively young man, and his empire was divided up into 4 parts, and Israel came under the domination of the Syrians. There's a lot of back and forth and fighting and so on, but it was the Syrians really who became the dominant power, at least for Israel. But then there was a rebellion in Israel led by the Maccabees, and they overthrew the Syrian dominion of Israel, and they became independent for about 150 years. Until the Romans came. And the Romans came not really with a lot of force, but with diplomacy and with treachery and the conspiracy and so on. And they took on the role of masters of Israel. And they ruled with an iron fist. Now, as we go through this story, we start now today in Luke chapter 1 and verse 5, and the Bible begins there, and it says, "It was in the days when Herod was king of Judea." And this gives us an historical context. Now we're going to hear something about angels, as I said yesterday, about angels and angelic choirs and so on. But this is not a myth. This is not a legend that we're looking at. This is an historical event. This happened, and it's embedded in history. And here we have a reference point. It was when Herod was the king of Judea. Now Herod was an Edomite. He was a descendant of Esau, the brother of Jacob. He didn't belong to Israel. He wasn't an Israelite. He wasn't a Jew. He came from outside, and there was quite some tension. But he married into the royal family of Judea, and through a lot of treachery and conspiracy and so on, he managed to appease the Romans by changing allegiances a number of times, and they appointed him to be king of Judea. Now, he had I suppose it was an inferiority complex. He was so insecure, and he was plagued by paranoia. He wanted to be the king of the Jews. He wanted them to accept him, and he was so insecure that people were plotting against him, and he had a lot of people killed. He had people murdered. At one time he had 38 members of the Sanhedrin murdered because he thought they were plotting against him. He put his 2 sons to death. He killed his wife because he was so afraid. He was so plagued with this insecurity, and that was kind of the atmosphere that was ruling at this time. And on the other hand, he was very kind and benign. When there was needs amongst the people, if a famine came, he would provide for the people so that he didn't need to suffer too much. He would reduce the taxes, and he would donate funds and material for the people. He built lots of different buildings, including having the temple extended and modernized and beautified so that it became one of the 7 wonders of the world. And it was in this background that we start this story, which is a story complete in itself, if you like, but actually it's part of this gigantic story, this big story of what God started to do after he created the world, after man had left him and gone his own way. It's a rescue story. It's a story of God trying to win the hearts of the people to bring them back into fellowship with him. God has now set the stage, and Paul would write later in Galatians 4 verse 4, when the time was fulfilled, God sent his son. So God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm looking forward to continuing with this story. You're Bob Hatton, your encourager.